Let's start with the U.S. Election, the off-year election. The election's result
Yeah.
is not surprising, right? That the
No.
Republicans lost and basically, right, the Democrats won. But the U.S. voters has a tendency to swing the other way after the presidential election. Do you think that's the reason, or people are genuinely not happy with Trump policy?
Well, it's interesting you've asked me that question because yesterday on the Duran, we did a
Hmm.
program with the US Attorney Robert Barnes,
Hmm.
who is very, very much closer to American politics than I am, and who has a granular understanding of American electoral politics, and who has, until very recently, been a supporter of Trump's,
Hmm.
and who is, I think, it's fair to say, closely aligned with the Republican Party. He thinks this was an electoral disaster for
Hmm.
Trump and the administration. He said that this went far beyond a normal swing,
Okay.
that in various states which participated, even minor offices, administrative offices,
Hmm.
which hardly ever change hands, local attorneys and things
Hmm.
of that kind, often in rock solid Republican areas, swung to the Democrats. In one place, the Democrats won where they hadn't won in 100 years.
Oh, wow.
So he said, yes. So he said this was actually an earthquake. And he says that his view is that it goes far beyond a normal electoral pendulum swing.
Hmm.
It signifies deep disaffection and the fracturing of Donald Trump's electoral base, that they're turning against him, that they feel that he's losing his way, that he's become increasingly distant from what he promised,
Hmm.
and that his electoral coalition is collapsing. And what is driving this more than anything else is the everyday conditions of life of more and more people. Now, Robert Barnes, and he's a tax lawyer, so tax lawyers
Hmm.
tend to be very, very, they know what is going on in the
Yeah.
economy. He made it fairly clear that he believes that the underlying economy in the United States is in deep recession.
Yeah, so the that's my feeling too, because you get the feeling that Trump in particular like to talk about the stock market, right? But most people
Mm.
they don't watch the stock market every day. They have to go buy groceries, right? And buy gas and all that kind of thing. And you do see the prices gone up. That is very much so. And I personally also think the Epstein file also hurt him a lot. I think that
Yes.
right that he made such a big promise that he made it very clear. And then this 180, I think, really make a lot of people disappointed, I think. So,
Well, it's very interesting you say that because Robert Barnes said exactly the same thing.
okay.
He said that the turning point was, in fact, the decision not to publish the
Uh-huh.
Epstein files. He
Yeah.
said that the two months, first 2, 3 months of the Trump administration, everything was going very much his way.
Uh-huh.
Then he made that decision in May, and from that moment, it's been a rapid decline. Things have been going from bad to worse.
Mhm.
His electoral base turned on him, and the policies, all of the other policies, began to change as well. And the policy towards both China and Russia became much
Mhm.
more aggressive as well too. And he
Yeah.
said that the electoral coalition opposes all of that,
Mhm.
and they felt that the decision not to publish the Epstein files was a massive breach of faith.
And I also feel that the in general, I think the Republican base, they are less forgiving. They tend to hold their politicians more accountable than the Democrat base.
Mm.
Do you feel that? I
Yes.
feel that's more so. Yeah.
Well, the modern Republican base absolutely. The one that Trump has created, no question about it. And again, Barnes said essentially the same thing, that
Hmm.
they're bitterly disillusioned with what Trump has done, that they voted for him, expecting him to do one thing, and he's ended up doing the other.
One more thing is with Mamdani's election victory, which actually is not surprising, but consider how much attack he was endured, right? That there's so many people lined up together to attack him, but he still won big. I wonder that reflects a little bit that, in particular, young people nowadays they are more accepting socialist than previous
Yeah.
generations, right?
Yes, in fact, very interesting again what Barnes had to say about this. I'm
Hmm.
sorry to repeat it, but I think it's as interesting for your
Yeah. Hmm.
was that yes, exactly, was that Barnes made this point. He said that in the United States there is a right populism to which, in effect, he belongs, and
Okay.
there is also a left populism.
Hmm.
And he said that both can be electorally successful because they address the actual concerns of people. And Barnes, who you would expect as a Republican to be very hostile to Mamdani, actually, to my surprise, was not. He
Hmm.
said that he absolutely could understand, given the realities in New York, the cost of living crisis
Hmm.
that exists there for more and more people, why Mamdani was electorally successful. And he also thinks that some of the things that Mamdani proposes are actually interesting and might succeed. I mean, it will not be a revolutionary moment
Hmm.
because it cannot be.
Hmm.
A mayor doesn't have that much power. But he said that the Mamdani win demonstrates again the bankruptcy, the electoral bankruptcy of the political center, of which Trump, it's now increasingly clear, is a part.
Now, with that, one thing I don't quite understand is this the government shuts down. Now it seems ending. Okay. It seems like the Democrats caved. They gave in a lot, but they just had this
Yeah.
remarkable electric, vi victory. Why they quickly cave? Is that how you interpret the
They did cave, and you're absolutely correct. I'm going to make a guess, and I'm afraid it's a very cynical one. I think that they started this shutdown
Mhm.
basically as an election tactic, which
Okay.
up to a point succeeded. They don't want it to continue too long because it's now us, but also many people who um, are part of their support base. And for that reason, having achieved the election victory,
Mhm.
they're now just switching it off. And I think, yeah, and as you rightly said, that means caving.
Yeah. Well, but does that mean, I mean, the key point here is the Obamacare subsidies, right? Now,
Yeah.
without the Obamacare subsidies, does it mean Obamacare is going to collapse, you think?
Presumably,
Okay.
eventually. I mean, I've never been impressed by Obamacare
Hmm.
at any point, I should say. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it seems to me that it was basically a massive subsidy
Yeah.
to a
Mhm.
healthcare system that is terrible. And when you subsidize a terrible system, you make it worse. I've noticed, by the way, China doesn't do subsidies.
No.
I mean, it is not a feature of the Chinese economic and social system in the way that it is in the West. Subsidies are a very, very big thing
Hmm.
in the United States. They're becoming a very big thing in Germany too, by the way. I've just done a program about it.
Hmm.
Um, and something that is basically already bad. And that was what Obama was. And sooner or later, it will collapse under its own weight because
Hmm.
what the subsidy does is that it rewards bad practice.
Yeah.
That's my own view. It's absolutely not anything to do with socialism. Let's make that absolutely clear. I
Yeah.
mean, a genuine, real socialism is something completely different.
Yeah, China's principle, like poverty eradication, what they're trying to do is to help people to be standing on their own feet, right? So that they build the infrastructures like a road and electricities and the power, I mean power lines and the phone lines and the internet. So they build all these things so that a very remote village can have a contact to the outside. So the people in that village
Yes,
will be able to, grow their own fruit, for example, and then sell them online and transport it. So
yes,
that's kind of
yes,
like what China's trying to do, letting people provide people with the condition for them to survive themselves. So that's very much the idea.
one of the things that was very interesting to me when I went to China, because
Hmm.
I don't know whether I've told you this, but I was there at the invitation of a friend of mine who is a banker, not Chinese,
Hmm.
was that I got to know an awful lot about Chinese commercial law while I
Hmm.
was there, and also Chinese company law.
Okay.
And it was very interesting and profoundly different from what you find in the West. So, Chinese company law is very oriented towards that makes up the company. It's not profit driven in the way that is the case in the West.
Hmm.
It tries to make you think, look, you are there as a company to achieve certain social and economic goals,
Hmm.
not just to make a lot of money for your shareholders. So
Yeah.
it was profoundly different. And my friend told me that this was something that you find in Chinese commercial contracts all the time. And it was very difficult to marry that with the kind of financial training that he
Hmm.
had, which was basically about always making the highest financial return.
Hmm.
So it's, if you like, an investment. The Chinese approach is investment driven towards achieving wider social economic objectives. It,
Hmm.
it it is very different. I was surprised how different it was, actually, having myself been done an awful lot of commercial law work and banking law work in my time.
I didn't know that. So that's interesting. I need to look into that.
Yeah,
That sounds
yeah.
interesting.
Well,
Um,
as I said, from him, as I said, I went through all kinds of contracts that with some pretty big
mhm,
Chinese companies as well.
mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, but I do notice that in China, like the Chinese government is
Yeah.
really reluctant to just give people money, the kind of a subsidy in
Yes.
that
Yes.
sense.
Yes.
So yeah, they
Yes.
they they tend to
Yes.
look into the root of the problem rather than just cover the
Yes.
surface.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, obviously, planning is not something that China has a ideological aversion to,
Yeah.
which we also have in the West,
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
places in the West. So again, this is it's it. The two systems are profoundly different from
Hmm.
each other,
Yeah.
despite the fact that there are obvious, resemblances. I mean, China does a lot of competition, as you basically said. In
Hmm.
fact, China does more competition
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
they do in Germany, for example.
Hmm.
Subsidies, the kind of subsidies that I talked about, are anti-competitive.
Hmm.
What I've been talking about just now with Chinese companies is not.
Okay, since we haven't talked for 2 weeks, regarding this deal that China and the US they agreed this pause for 1 year. I myself is still skeptical whether it can last that long for 1 year. But one thing already shows that Trump now he made it clear he will continue to ban NVIDIA Blackwell chips, the top AI chips, which I thought
Yeah.
they agreed that he will loosen up, but it seems like he's still going to ban that. Now, it's not just banned towards China, but a ban all the export beyond the US, so no country can get it. That seems like the But nonetheless, I feel like he already made that promise, but it's not going to. I got the feeling within the Trump circle, there are two sets of people, the hawks and the doves. The hawks, I got the feeling like a Rubio, maybe Hexas, and of course, Albert Kobe, that group of the people hold him back a lot of times. For example, I even feel like that military parade in Beijing, I do get the feeling he really wanted to go. I got the feeling those are the people who told him not to. And then on the other side is, I think Bessent is somewhat moderate, and he himself, and also David Sachs, who is the AI czar. David Sachs made it very clear, multiple occasions, he feels like this ban on high-end chips is a very nuanced issue because he realized that when you ban it, you don't really slow down China. Maybe moderately, a little bit you can slow down, but you kind of force China to be self-sufficient, to find alternatives, and find ways around it. It's not necessarily a good thing for the United States in the long run. So I got the feeling David Sachs and Bessent, Trump himself may be willing to do this, but he's holding back by the other group, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that your feeling?
You're completely right. I should declare an interest here because I know David Sachs,
Okay.
and I don't want to say too much,
Hmm.
but I think that your views of him are basically correct and things.
Okay.
But in terms of all of the others, I think you're absolutely correct. I think the fundamental problem with Donald Trump is that he gives the impact. He likes to project this appearance that he's strong, decisive leader. The reality is he's the opposite. He's a very weak leader who
Okay.
is very insecure and says one thing one day, says something completely different the next day. I'll give you two examples that I absolutely now know about. We've talked about Russia and
Hmm.
relations between the US and Russia. It turns out when they last spoke on the phone, Putin and Trump told Putin that he was meeting Zelensky in the White House the following day
Hmm.
and that he would get Zelensky at that meeting to agree to
Okay.
what Putin and Trump had agreed in Alaska,
Hmm.
which was essentially Istanbul plus the various things that we've talked about many times.
Hmm.
And so that was the Russian expectation. That was what Trump told Putin that he would do. He then met Zelensky the following day.
Hmm.
There was an argument. Trump comes out of the meeting. He agrees with Zelensky. There's going to be a freeze on the existing conflict lines. And of course, all the usual people in Washington, some of whom you mentioned, Rubio and Co., came along and whispered into his ear and told him you must go with what Zelensky does. So to he says to Putin that he's going to do one thing.
Hmm.
He then the following day does the diametric opposite. The same happened with Viktor Orban. Viktor
Okay.
Orban meets Trump.
Hmm. Hmm.
Here it's all about oil. Hungary's imports of oil from Russia. Orban comes out of the meeting with Trump and says, I've been given an indefinite promise
Hmm.
that I can continue to buy Russian oil for Hungary. Hours later, the Treasury comes out and says, no, he's wrong. It's only for 1 year. So he's been told one thing,
Hmm.
something completely different happens about this agreement that Xi Jinping and
Hmm.
Trump made with each other. You are completely right to be skeptical. By the way, the more we know about this agreement,
Hmm.
the more humiliating for the United States the
Hmm.
terms of it is clear, have become. And I have been told, and I believe, that when you said that Bessent is one of the more moderate figures, this is completely wrong.
Okay.
In fact, apparently it was Bessent who told Trump on Chinese companies that will be subject to sanctions, this 50% rule. Don't worry, there is no way that the Chinese will use rare earths as leverage against us. It's not going to happen. They'll never do that. And then shock, of course, the following day they did. So anyway, the point is, you're absolutely right. He went into that meeting. He made this agreement. He was humiliated. He came away feeling humiliated. All of the hardliners around him came away feeling humiliated. And they are already going back on it. And they will continue to do it. And it will fall apart. And Bessent is now talking and saying that in 2 years they'll have all of the the refining abilities to do rare earths. Well, we talked about it the last time we spoke. I've now had an engineer who actually is in this area, and he provided me with a massive information. He thinks that if you cut every corner, if you rush this and drive this as fast as you possibly can, which he doesn't believe the Americans can do, by the way. He told me that the quickest you can do it is in 10 years, not 2.
Yeah, I actually saw Bessent talk about this a few times. One was on Fox, maybe another CNN or something, and he sounded like that 1 year deal is giving the U.S. enough time to fix this rare earth problem. So that's pretty much what he's saying. Okay, so. But anyway, I mean, let's see how long this thing can hold. But they already banned, high-end chips, which they promised that they are going to loosen up. China is okay with that because actually Bloomberg actually said that China bans now foreign AI chips from state-funded data centers. So China actually is fine with that. But it is a promise that the U.S. made, a big one that they can't keep right now. Okay, so and
it was something that they themselves came to the table with. As I understand it, it was the Chinese didn't ask the United States to agree to provide high-end chips. Trump came to the table. Well, maybe it wasn't Trump, maybe it was Scott Bessent, but they said, look, if you relax on rare earths, we will relax on high-end chips. There were other parts of the deal. Chinese said, okay. They said they offered to do it. The agreement was done, and now they're already going back on it.
I think the two things, one is this 50% thing, this sanction all the companies that owned more than 50% by Chinese. I think that's one thing that China really very angry about. And then the other thing is this port fee that really, I mean, if they implement it, it will, certainly hurt China. Now, of course, China has some retaliation way, but it will truly hurt both, I think, the port fee. Now, I read something interesting. This port fee idea apparently come from Britain. There is one theory that is actually the British who proposed this to Trump when Trump was visiting. Remember Trump had a state visit in Britain, so they somehow got into this discussion. So it's the British there's one explanation is that during that visit, Trump get that idea from the Brits, and because the British used that against the Dutch somewhere along history. Is that right? So,
yes, it is. It's absolutely true. They did it in the 17th century, a rather different time from today. I mean, all I could say is what you've just told me doesn't me at all. It still stuns me. I find that flabbergasting. It's the kind of thing that I can imagine some idiot in Britain coming up with. But I mean, it wasn't just a stupid idea, but an incredibly bad idea. I mean, a terrible idea. If you want to develop a US shipbuilding industry, by all means, do so. Do so. Do so. Russia, which is a friend of China's, by the way, has massively invested in building up its shipbuilding industry. They did a big deal some years ago with South Korea, because the South Koreans also good with
Yeah.
shipbuilding, and they built big shipbuilding facilities in the Pacific, which are now soon going to get into production.
Hmm.
You can do that,
Yeah.
but to start imposing port fees on ships simply because China just it's one of the worst things I've ever seen. And to think that, you know, something that you could do back in the English did back in the 17th century would work today. I mean, it's just foolishness on a scale that I just can't even begin to fathom.
Yeah. Another thing is right after the deal, Trump at one point claimed that China promised to help the United States to convince Russia to stop the war. I don't read anywhere in the Chinese media or its readout. I don't think China ever promised something like that. What do you think?
I think it is inconceivable that China promised something like that. I can tell you what I'm sure happened is
Mm,
that Xi Jinping and Trump had a discussion about Ukraine and about China's relations with Russia. Xi Jinping will have other countries, its foreign relations with, you know, it doesn't decide who, it won't let other countries decide who will be its friends.
mhm.
It's a sovereign country. And as for the war, China has always sought peace.
Yeah.
It's always been trying
Yeah.
to achieve peace. I mean, I read this all the time in the Chinese media. The Chinese make the point that they have at no point in time tried to make the conflict worse.
Mhm.
It's the Americans who do.
Yeah.
They pour fuel on the fire by all their weapons supplies.
Yeah. And they
And
somehow,
it's not impossible, given that Trump doesn't understand these things, that he walked away and misunderstood what Xi Jinping told him.
Mhm.
But it's equally possible that the Americans are deceiving people.
Yeah, yeah. And regarding the tariffs in general, so it seems like based on the questions that are being asked, the Supreme Court seems like they might strike it down, the tariffs.
Yeah,
But Trump does have other options. I don't know if you and Robert discussed
yeah,
this because there are other laws
yes,
that Trump could invoke to continue the tariffs. Is that right?
yes. Yes, and in fact, we did discuss it with Robert, and
Uh-huh.
again, it'll be an interesting discussion there. And he thinks that, in fact, some members of the Supreme Court might even suggest, in a kind of a way, to
Okay.
the administration, to Trump, that he might take that course. But I understand from my own research that this is not actually so simple, and
Mhm.
that these other provisions that do exist that would make this possible are very time limited
Mhm.
and are subject to all kinds of conditions, which it might be very difficult for Trump to fulfill.
Mhm.
So it would not be simply a simple thing to replace one set of tariffs, one structure for
Mhm.
tariffs with a completely different one. Um, there were reasons why Trump didn't use these other laws initially,
Mhm.
and I don't think he would want to do that actually.
But he was, I think he was, he's saying he posted on his social media saying, "I'm going to give $2,000 to American people to share this great success." I guess he claimed, his tariffs because he
Yeah,
collected so much money, so everybody would get $2,000. I think that's his way of pressuring the Supreme Court and possibly
yeah.
the Democrats, because if you are going to strike it down you're not going to get that $2,000. Is that what he was trying to do? I
Well,
think.
that's exactly what he's trying to do. And of course, I would say that was illegal, by the way, because you can't. I mean, that is playing fast and loose with uh, with the budget. You can't use budget funds, which is what you shouldn't use budget
Hmm.
funds in this way. The United States is running a huge budget deficit.
Hmm.
It doesn't have the financial maneuver space to hand out $2,000 in this way, or at least, well, it can.
Hmm.
I mean, it's done that in the past, but I mean, it shouldn't. I mean, it's irresponsible.
And then the very next day, Bessent came out saying, well, it not necessarily will be cash, but it will be like a tax deduction and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And it's going to be low income families. So it sounds like people like me, middle class, and my friends probably we won't get it. I just get the feeling we won't get it, but it sounds good,
Well,
right?
I'm sure you won't. Well, it sounds good. It sounds attractive, and it again, it will appeal to people, and as you said, it will put pressure on the Supreme Court.
Hmm.
But if he wants to do something like that, this is my own personal view now. Given that Congress has now passed the budget, which is his
Hmm.
big, beautiful bill and all of that, if he's going to use budget funds like that, if he just does it, he's breaking the budget law. He
Hmm.
should go back to Congress. To be interesting to see what they say.
Yeah. Regarding his foreign policy, right? He threatened with war with Venezuela and at some point with Colombia. But now it's Nigeria. Well,
Yeah.
what is he trying to do here? It feels like he definitely wants to have a war. He needs a war. It's almost like
Yes.
an addiction, that I have to have that
Yes.
that glass of
Yes.
wine or something. Is that what it is?
Yes. I think that's exactly right. It's I mean, the president of peace, which is what he told us, is running it. Everything else is falling apart around him. So he now wants uh, 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 um, a nice little war that will restore his reputation. Except his electoral base don't want it. I
No.
mean, that's
Hmm.
another reason why he's losing support. But you're absolutely right, and I think it's also perhaps his own way of reassuring himself that he's still powerful and strong,
Hmm.
to launch this war and win this war somewhere. And that will give him another, bounce in his step and will make him feel that he's succeeding. Because actually, and this is the other thing to say, I mean, he's failing in everything. At this moment in time,
Hmm.
everything that he is doing is starting to fail. Even I gather his immigration policy is
Uh-huh.
starting to buckle.
Yeah. Yeah, and one more thing is the London Metal Exchange now they suspend all the trading in non-US dollar metal options. So clearly is protecting dollars somehow. I mean, that's pretty extreme
Yeah,
method, isn't it?
yes, it is. It is. Again, you're absolutely correct. That is exactly what that is trying to do. They're now trying to support the dollar, which shows you that despite the fact that dollar volatility has apparently declined,
Hmm.
there is a great deal of nervousness um, under the surface about how resilient this whole thing is in the long term or even the medium term.
Xperia, there's no other way to describe it that the Dutch government caved. Is that what happened? I
Yes,
mean,
yes, there's absolutely, they had no choice. They had absolutely no choice but to do that. Apparently, this is all linked to the 50% thing that the Americans were doing. And apparently they came along to the Dutch and said, look, unless you take control of Nexpedia in the Netherlands, it'll be sanctioned because it'll be on our sanctions list because it's 50%, it'll be
mhm.
50% control or connected to Chinese businesses that we're also already sanctioning. So the Dutch nonetheless went ahead and did that. That was a massive mistake, by the way. And what they did was outrageous and completely unjustified.
I
And well, we all saw the results,
well,
and that started to have ripple effects across European industry and American industry too.
I still feel that it's still stunning to me. I know they got the pressure from the United States, but United States, this 50% doesn't just apply to one company, Nexperia. There's many other companies.
Yeah,
I still think,
yeah,
like at the time, it was a transitional, temporary government, right? They were heading into a election at the end of October. The
yeah,
Dutch, I mean, the smart thing would be just postpone it, just saying, okay, let's wait until the election, at the end of this month, we're going to have the new government and leave to them. And if this were me, if by the, feel the pressure from the US, I would say I would discuss this with the owner of the company, which is Wintech, and the Chinese government, just tell them, okay, this is what's coming. The US is going to sanction this company. What should we do? Because you're the owner and you're the Chinese government. Why does the US, I mean, the Dutch doesn't discuss with any of these people, just to grab it, can't even wait. I mean, at the time, the US and China was negotiating also. Why couldn't they just wait for a couple of weeks, like to see where does it go? I still feel like it's down to it. I still feel, but bottom line, I feel the Dutch government is racist, and those are three high level managers from the company, they themselves, I think, are racist. They hate the fact that their boss is a Chinese. They see this as an opportunity for themselves to advance and get rid of their CEO and advance. I still want to. I mean, the U.S. is not a good good player
You
here.
are you're absolutely right in everything that you said. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, let's say in the days when affairs in Europe were run in a completely different way, if the Americans had come along and said to the Dutch, "Look, this is what we're going to do," the Dutch wouldn't have rushed off
No.
and basically done this smash and grab illegal raid on a successful and viable company. The Dutch would have been furious. They would have come back and said to the Americans, "How dare you do this thing? How dare you interfere in our own economic relations? This is outrageous. This is wrong. This is a successful company. It's got Chinese owners. It's got a good relationship with China, but it's providing an enormous benefit to the European economy, to the Dutch economy, to the American economy. It's no conceivable threat to national security or any of that nonsense that you're talking about. And if you want to start passing your own sanctions laws, well, we are under no duty to recognize them, to press forward and do something like that, then be aware that that will impact on your relations with us. Now, I can remember when European governments did behave like that. The Dutch did what they did, not just because they're weak, but because they wanted to. I mean, they have, there is in Europe also today extraordinary sense of anger that China is moving ahead in industrial industrial methods and technologies. I just before I did this program, I read of German industry, and it blamed it. A lot of the article blamed it on China, and the fact that the Chinese have now managed to upgrade to produce goods, to produce finished goods that are as good or even better than the German ones. This is not something to be celebrated. This is something outrageous, apparently, and undermining our great economy in Germany. And they were talking about tariffs again in this article, which is, who they're going to target with those tariffs. So you're absolutely right. A win-win situation between the Netherlands and China, and Europe and China thrown into confusion, thrown into chaos, because the Americans have these geopolitical issues with China, and the Europeans have these complexes about China too. If the Netherlands had stood firm, if Europe had backed it, the US would have backed down.
Yeah. Yeah, I
The
think so
US
too.
would undoubtedly have, because the US needs those chips too.
Yeah. Yeah. And they haven't reinstated the CEO, the Chinese CEO. But in China, there's some discussions about whether moving forward, do they really want to take back the control for the Nexperia Dutch part? because there is a real possibility that all these auto companies, their production has been interrupted. So there is a loss that they might be able to
Yeah.
claim towards the Dutch Nexperia. So one option could be China just to
Yeah.
have its own Chinese Nexperia by itself. And whatever the Dutch Nexperia
Yes.
does, it's kind of like totally separated. And you can claim whatever the damage from the Dutch Nexperia. The China Nexperia will have nothing to do with it. That could be a real possibility. And there could be a significant amount
Well,
of
I
money.
think
Yeah.
absolutely, and ultimately, I suspect the Dutch government will be liable too,
Yes. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Dutch Nexpedia is going to pass on some of that liability to the Dutch government, because they'll say that they were involved in doing all of this and it was
Yeah.
force majeure. Now, I read some about a week ago
Mhm.
that the Chinese Commerce Ministry has actually said that any company around the world that is short of chips, what they should do is get in touch with China. In other words,
Mhm.
presumably Nexpedia China and perhaps the Commerce Ministry as well. So basically, they're already doing exactly what you said. They're cutting Dutch Nexpedia out of the chain.
Yeah.
And they are also, this is very important, by the way, they're also telling industrial companies around the world, don't deal with your own governments. Talk to the Chinese government instead. You'll
Yeah.
get rational decisions from us, not from your own government any longer.
One more thing, also in the Chinese media mentioned that the Chinese Nexperia would take in new customers, existing and the new customers, but they also
Yeah.
require them to pay the Chinese yuan. Now, I don't find confirmation from the official Chinese government official
Yes.
announcement, but there is a possibility that's what one of the things that they're going to using the Chinese yuan instead of a dollar. So we will see. But nonetheless,
Yes.
I think this is a big
Indeed.
mess that the Dutch government created. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other people who, by the way, played a massive role in this was the
Uh-huh.
European Commission,
Mhm.
because this is obviously a European company, and of course the European Commission should have been involved. And I cannot believe that they weren't informed and
Mhm.
consulted, and they should have immediately intervened and said, no, you
Mhm.
cannot do this.
But they they never does. Van der Leyen, it's hard for me to see how she would ever stand up
No,
to the US.
no,
So
no,
yeah.
no, no,
Why? Now
exactly.
you mentioned about Orban's visit to the United States. Why doesn't the European countries
Yeah,
learn something from him? Because he's a remarkable, very skilled politician, in my view. He managed to keep a good relationship with the US, with
yeah,
Russia, and with China. Why can't the rest of the Europeans learn something
yes.
from him?
Yeah, that's excellent question, actually, because it takes us back to the Nexpedia, the Nexpedia issue, because Orban has done for Hungary exactly what for the Netherlands,
Mhm.
an attack on a Dutch company, which was Nexpedia, a company with Chinese owners but based
Mhm.
in the Netherlands. And the Dutch folded. An attack on the Hungarian oil and energy industry involving a Russian owned oil refinery, which is Lukoil,
Mhm.
from Lukoil, and imports of Russian oil. And of course, instead of doing what the Dutch did, which was folding, Orban comes along and says to Trump, "This is absolutely unacceptable.
Mhm.
It has to be changed. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm going to push back," and actually defends Hungarian national
Yeah.
interests.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Once upon a time, that was what all European
Mm.
governments did. Now it seems only Hungary and one or two others like Slovakia do,
Uh-huh.
and it baffles me.
And I don't feel like Trump was offended or anything. When he was talking to Trump, Trump was respectful
No,
of what his demand
yes.
and accommodating in the end, right? So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I said to you, I think we were already doing programs then. When I went to Hungary last year, one of the things that I found was that it was like taking a time machine, which existed 20 or 30 years ago. I don't mean in terms of technologies and industries, but the way in which government in Hungary actually works. It's both totally familiar to me and completely different from what we see elsewhere in Europe now.
Regarding the Ukraine war, any update? I don't see a slowing down as winter is approaching. So the Russians still moving forward. Is that what is going on in the front line?
There is an acceleration, and it's starting to cause alarm, real alarm. So we have these two cities, Pakrovsk and Kupiansk, and there are Ukrainian troops who are surrounded there. Now, the Ukrainians have denied that, but the British media has now admitted that this is basically true. So, I mean, we don't have to dispute this anymore. And there are other parts of the front lines where the Russians are advancing faster and further also. And the Russians also conducted a massive missile and drone strike against Ukraine about 4 days ago, which came very close to knocking out completely the entire energy system. So the cities were blacked out. So there has been no slowdown. There's an acceleration instead.
How long do you think the Ukrainian will keep on fighting? I mean, they don't seems making much progress. It is the
there
the
was
Russian.
an article in the London Times by its chief foreign correspondent, who's a man called Roger Boyes. He has been active since the 1970s. And he published an article about a week ago in which he said that Ukraine will survive until the spring, but not beyond it. So that's Roger Boyes, far more well-connected and well-informed about the realities than I am.
It has been reported that India stopped buying Russia oil. Is that real, or India has bought enough so they do a pause for now, in your opinion?
Well, the Indian Oil Company actually made, according to Reuters, they actually bought 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil. They made contracts for the supply of this oil in December. So it is not true. What I think is happening is this. India is in the process of negotiating a trade agreement with the United States. Very complex story. And I think that they don't want to rock the boat with the Americans whilst these negotiations, they are oil, and but not ending it completely, and are telling the Americans that this is what they're doing. I think once this agreement is signed and sealed, they'll go back to buying Russian oil. If it is, which it might not be, by the way, because I understand there's all sorts of other problems.
Speaking of India, so India and Pakistan, they both experienced the suicide bombings in their capitals. And also Bangladesh experiences some wave of bombings and arsons. What is going on in South Asia now? It's just lots of instability.
There is instability, and I think the thing to say is that in this part of the world, this isn't entirely new. And remember, we had that armed clash between India and Pakistan. I suspect what's happened is this: after that armed clash, there was some kind of an attempt to try and stabilize the situation between India and Pakistan. And India also currently is trying to improve relations with China, and some people don't like that. And so we've now seen this recurrence of violence, and it's also affecting Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. So I suspect that very complex country, not always easy to understand what is going on. Putin is supposed to be visiting India on the 3rd and 4th of December. And supposedly large numbers of deals are going to be done, including a major Russian arms sales to India, all of which, by the way, if true, would mean that India is recommitting itself to the BRICS.
Hmm.
just to say. So there are lots of causes and reasons for tension at this time.
Okay. Um, the one thing that doesn't get a lot of coverage, although I do see the British media covered the Sudanese civil war. Um,
Yeah,
so apparently 2,000 children and women were killed in 2 days last month, and
yeah,
so it sounds like a
yes.
brutal civil war. Can you explain a little bit? They had a civil war, and then the country split into two, right? And then they continued. The war continued, or
Yes,
what's going
yes.
on?
I mean, this is again a story of Western interference and destabilization of what used to be Africa's biggest country,
Mhm.
a country, Sudan, with abundant resources, by the way,
Yeah,
and the West has never left it alone.
yeah.
I mean, there was a civil war. I remember back in the 70s, and then it stabilized, and there was a leader called Numeri who managed to stabilize the situation for a long time, and it seemed to be doing well. And it had good relations with China at that time. By the way, we're talking about the 70s and 80s, and even the Soviet Union. And then, of course, some people didn't like that, and then the policy changed, and then Numeri was eventually removed, and then it all drifted back into crisis,
Hmm.
and then there were various attempts because government the actual Sudanese government in Khartoum was pursuing non-aligned foreign policies. There was attempts to try and undermine it by instigating secessionist movements in the south of Sudan.
Hmm.
And these focused on South Sudan and a region called Darfur. And I can tell you for an absolute fact, because people who I know were involved in this, the Americans were absolutely involved
Hmm.
in the in South Sudan in trying to make South Sudan break away from Sudan, and they also supported the insurgencies in Darfur, and that led to the destabilization of the Sudanese government and the Sudanese leader, a man called Omar al-Bashir, was of course indicted by the International Criminal Court, whose function
Hmm.
mostly is to indict people like that the West doesn't like. So he then fell from power. That created further destabilization in Sudan. That then, in turn, also led various outside actors, including the Americans, but some of their friends of the Gulf also to become involved. And the result is the crisis and breakdown and the civil war within Sudan itself that we now see. Uh, if Sudan had been left alone, the likelihood is it would be a peaceful country. In fact, I'm sure it would be.
Hmm. Well, their problem is that they're very rich in natural resource. And that once that is the case, it's always a curse. I think, like the Western, like you said, they will not leave it alone because it has, natural
Yeah,
resources.
the
Yeah.
the other thing is the other thing is the borders on the Red Sea.
Uh-huh.
uh, the Red Sea. China has a base there.
Hmm.
The Sudanese government, before the existing civil war was about to happen, was in negotiations with the Russians about the Russians setting up a base, a naval base in Sudan on the Red Sea. So, of course, in order to stop that, Sudan had to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And now we write articles about the tragedies that happened in Darfur and about, how you could see the blood flowing on the streets from space and all of that.
Mhm.
We write all of these articles in the media in the West and accept no responsibility for the disaster that we have brought about.
Yeah, we never do that. We never explain, the ins and out
No,
of what exactly
no,
happened. They just
no,
telling us, okay, there is
no,
a massacre went on, for 2 days and all that, but
yeah,
they don't tell you, what
no,
led to it, right? So,
no.
yeah.
The one thing I would just quickly say is notice China is never involved in any
Yeah.
of these,
And these
in
things
never
like,
involved in any of these
yeah,
events.
yeah, yeah.
Nothing,
Uh,
nothing.
China overall, throughout its history is always very looking inward. I mean, China likes to do trade, but
Yes,
other than that, it's like most pretty much just any time they want to focus on China itself. So, yeah.
yes, as every country should.
Yeah,
Just
but the West never do that. Haven't you noticed like the
no.
West never just focusing on inward. It just always like looking around
Yes.
and stir troubles somewhere.
Well, we were talking about Trump and the elections in the United States at the start of this program. One of the points that Barnes also made is that the president was elected based on a program of focusing on the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah.
He now spends far more time about
Uh-huh.
foreign policy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as American, I agree. I want him to spend more time inward, like, building up the infrastructure. I mean, they're talking about the power. When I'm away, there is another power outage in my town. It has been keep on going. 10 years
Mhm.
ago, we
Mhm.
really got a power outage, but it's getting more and more frequent now. Like, and they know this is
Yeah,
important because AI needs a lot of power, right? We know that the processing rare earth needs a lot of power. Whatever you do, you need a lot of power. Why don't they spend
yeah,
some time and
yeah,
energy on doing something like that? But they don't.
yes. Well, quite, well, quite.
And one more thing is my audience are just curious. They always lots of them curious about like regular lives and like prices. Can you just briefly tell my audience what's the price living in Britain in London right now? How do you feel? Just
There is significant inflation. I mean, it's not very different from what you
mhm,
hear in New York, for example. I mean, first of all, in London, it's essentially impossible for anybody on even reasonably good incomes to actually buy their own home in London. I
mhm,
mean, people are completely priced out of the London housing market, and this is creating a major crisis for especially young place to live. So it's very common in London for young people. And I'm talking about people who who are earning reasonably well,
mhm,
that they not only have to share flats, but you even hear stories about people sharing beds. So you have rents for
mhm.
beds,
Yeah.
and you
Mhm.
spend some time in bed, and then you have to leave, and then the other person replaces you, and things of that kind. But in the shops, every couple of months, I noticed that the amount I'm spending is increasing. And then we also have something that's very difficult, perhaps, for people in China to understand, which is called shrinkflation.
Okay.
So you buy a jar of pickles, for example, or a jar of oil.
Mhm.
That's perhaps more obvious to me. And rather than increase the price, they
Yeah.
shrink the size
Mhm.
of the jar.
Yeah.
And I would say that over the last 6 months, I've noticed an enormous jump in the amount of this that's taking place.
Mhm.
So, what your money goes far less far in
Mhm.
terms of food. Energy costs, electricity costs in Britain, I believe, are the highest in any G20 country,
Yeah.
and they're much higher than in China. And of
Yeah.
course, Britain also is very claims to have very ambitious programs in AI, and they're trying to set up a railway line between Cambridge and Oxford, and
Mhm.
they're trying to set up a technology cluster between the two, and they want to move into AI and all of that. But the energy part of the equation, we are
Mhm.
nowhere close to even starting to address. So energy costs very high here. Food costs very high here.
Mhm.
Housing costs very high here, and a sense that the economy is basically stagnating, and that living standards are falling, and the government is now talking about raising taxes when the budget comes in 2 weeks' time.
One thing I do find a little bit encouraging in this election is that in Virginia, which is one of the states that have this off-year
Yeah.
election, they do more and more places, they do brought up this data center issue that it consumes a
Yes.
tremendous amount of energy, doesn't really provide much jobs, and doesn't pay much taxes and all
Yes.
that kind of thing. But people are
Yes.
paying attention now because it hurts people's wallet, right? Because it's contributing
Yes.
to the increased electricity cost. So people do. I think the candidates they do talk about that. So that's something good, I guess. At least people start paying attention to that. So let's see. Because
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. Now, again, there is you see you read this all the time, every single week almost. You read in parts of the media here about how China is adding huge resources in terms of energy. There's been a lot of discussion here, by the way, about China developing thorium
mm-hmm.
reactors.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know to what extent this has been talked about in China itself, but this revolutionary new technology in
Mm-hmm.
nuclear power. But the interesting thing is people talk about what China is doing, but it never translates into anything being done here. I mean, we are not addressing these problems here,
Mm-hmm.
um, and to the extent that there is any immediate concern about energy policy, it's basically about trying to close the gaps, to
Mm-hmm.
plug the holes rather in the energy system, which is becoming more and more fragile and creakier
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
Yeah, the only thing Trump talk about is deregulation. I guess he kind of like
Yeah.
let everybody just do whatever you want. But I actually think in terms of
Yes.
energy, you actually do need a coordination and planning, probably more than anything else. But his idea is just you do whatever you want. We're not going to have red tapes on you. That seems like his solution. So,
This is very much the prevailing philosophy in Britain too. So all
okay.
you need to do is just leave the energy industry to sort it out by themselves,
Yeah.
and they will do it. Supposedly,
Yeah.
that's spontaneous combustion, and we'll just have energy pack. Whatever power plants people can build, they'll just build them in some
Yeah.
form.
Yeah. Somehow the problem will just disappear, right? It will
It will
resolve
solve itself.
itself.
Yeah.
People told me that the what happened in the Soviet Union gave a lot of the leaders in China kind of like they shocked by because it's yes, it is a competition between the US and Soviet, but in the end, the collapse of the Soviet is very much the Soviet itself inside. They themselves, I guess, bought into the Western idea rather than
Yeah,
insisting of their own way of running the country. So this,
that's
I
absolutely true.
yeah, so that's why China is very careful with ideology related thing coming from outside. So
The,
that's
the,
why.
the, uh, I understand that completely. And can I just say something else? Russians have told me this themselves.
Okay.
I mean one of the disasters, just a piece of
Mhm.
thing that might be interesting, is that not only did Western ideas contaminate the Soviet Union, but one of the results was that the West got a lock grip on the universities,
Yeah.
and economics departments and sociology departments went over completely to Western thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and it was disastrous.
Yeah.
And they have to make huge efforts in Russia now to try to get through that. And but um, it not only meant that the advice that was coming to the government from the academic world was utterly distorted,
Mm-hmm.
but of course the student body were corrupted, if I can put it like that
Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, this is very, very well understood in Russia today. Russians tell me that it was not the economy that brought the Soviet Union down. It was
Mm-hmm.
much more precisely these things that you've just been saying. The economic problems could have been fixed.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Soviet Union went through much harder economic
Mm-hmm.
times in the past than what it was facing in the 1980s. But the problem was that the Soviets lost their belief in their own ideology,
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
own system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and China learned that, that's a big lesson, and it's a big
Uh,
shock for China. So that's
Absolutely.
why they have been very careful with all these, ideology
Yes.
related things. All right. Okay.
Absolutely. Of
Let's
course.
talk.
That's fine.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
talk next
Have
week.
a great week.